Mr. Speaker, worthy members of the opposition, my esteemed partners and members of the Parliament, thank you for being here today. So, we have brought up in the opposition's argument talking about bringing up the religious aspect of things, and it was mentioned that the example given of Jesus giving his life to save his many followers was a voluntary act. I did, however, bring up later, after my second case point, that it is more moral in the case of it being a voluntary act. So I do agree with you in that stance, that it is more moral if the sacrifice, if the death is voluntary. But I do believe that the purpose and the message still stands, that it would still benefit many for the death to happen. I also did bring up in the religious examples that Abraham was told by God to sacrifice his son and was willing to do so for the better of his family, his town, his people, right? So I did bring up an example of an involuntary sacrifice being used in the Bible in that way. And again, I am referencing the Bible. I agree with the discomfort of using religion to validate our government policies. I 1000% agree with that, but it is something to note that our country was founded on these beliefs, and that a majority of Americans would identify as Christian or as a Christian sect, a part of Christianity, whether that be baptism or Catholicism. So in enforcing this belief, we are affirming the government that we have now, in enforcing the idea that religion could support this argument. It's really just going off of what kind of policies we have now and why it would continue to support such an argument. You mentioned that in my second case point, where it could be for safety reasons, in terms of getting rid of criminals, I brought up a specific example of like a serial killer. It would be better to kill them so that more people don't end up dying. You mentioned that overlooks the possibility of rehabilitation, and I could argue that rehabilitation only sometimes works. Most of the time, those people are very far into a mental illness or their beliefs that led them to begin killing somebody, and rehabilitation is just not viable for them. It's not an option. And so why would we justify using that over eliminating the source of the problem at all, over eliminating somebody who is willing to hurt many? We could sacrifice their life. And again, with the judicial process and such, of course, it's more justified that it would be in a situation where they did pose a current threat to the police officer, such as holding a weapon to them and threatening to shoot it. Then obviously the kill is more justified. But just as a concept, I think it makes more sense to want to get rid of somebody who is willing to hurt many to save the many than to keep the one person around as a threat. Then you brought up an example about a study done on African men, and how they were unknowing that there was a cure for syphilis, and you were kind of using that to show that I did not have the moral high ground. I think that it was a poor example to bring up, though. In the example that you mentioned, they were unknowing. They were not being told of this process. They weren't being told of this experiment. That's not the process that I mentioned would be used in this case. If this were to become a policy that it was best to kill one to save the many, that's something that people would understand as moral, as like baseline. That's what's agreed upon. And so in your case, it's kind of being sneaky and conniving, but that's not what the intention of this would be. The intention is to save the many by agreeing that you should kill one. It's not to go around killing secretly people and not telling them that they have these other options, or that's not what we're doing. So for all these reasons, vote for the government.